Well, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everybody joining us in this session of How to Secure Your Data. We've got two gentlemen on the exact opposite sides of the world, and even though COVID's in and no one can travel, I'm sure if they both dug a hole, they would catch up somewhere in the middle of the earth. So we've got Chris Hilton here from Blanco in New Zealand, in Wellington, and we've got John Woodward from Ultratest Solutions in Systems in the UK. And what today is really about is a couple of things: the importance of data and destruction of data, the understanding of what defines the erasure of data, and we get so many, even in experiences I've had, where I get backyard companies saying that they'll do a 3 white pass, that's enough, and I'll create a certificate, and you send that through to whoever you have acquired the infrastructure from, saying that that's enough. And it isn't. There's a lot more to it. There's chain of custody, owning, ensuring that you've got the asset. Then there's the ethics behind it, which is ensuring that once the data is removed securely, that the asset is treated in a way that is green of nature. And that's where John's been successful in. How do you look at hardware that could otherwise have been destroyed and realize value in that? So we're just going to do some questions and answers, no PowerPoints. And I suppose we're just going to sort of open up with a couple of questions. Chris or John, is there anything you'd like to say to start off with?
Hello, I'm Chris Hilton. As Brett says, I live in New Zealand. I've been with Blanco for about 16 years in sort of reseller roles and more lately in technical support roles. So, yeah, catching up with John on my technical expertise.
Hi, I'm John Woodward, Managing Director of Ultratest. As Brett said, based here in the UK. We are a little bit different than Blanco in that we take a slightly different approach. We're more in the regeneration of hardware rather than purely looking at erasure. But as Chris and I have discussed in the past, we sit quite nicely together and can complement each other in certain environments too. So it's all good.
Yeah, when we're in a pub, we're very complimentary. You're looking great, John.
It's amazing. I hadn't spoken to either John or Chris until a few weeks ago, and what starts off as a 10-minute conversation it doesn't get dragged out. It actually becomes a good little bit of banter because there's so much knowledge between these two individuals, and it's an extremely it's a good thing to really understand because everybody plays a role in ensuring that they look after their customers, and if they're missing out on their value of looking at what can they do with their infrastructure, it's something that can be either quite dangerous or missed opportunity. So I'm going to probably start by asking Chris, about compliance requirements around the globe in data destruction, and sort of give some differences or some commonalities because we aren't all the same.
No, and it's one of the interesting things. In Europe, you've got the GDPR. In the US, you've got multiple different regulations that you have to comply with. In New Zealand, we're sort of slowly catching up. Australia's quite advanced. And there are various different countries around APAC, but they've pretty much got their own data protection act or data protection regulations. So in Australia, you've got the Australian Privacy Act of 1988, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Korea, Indonesia have all got protection regulations in place for personally identifiable information, and some of them can bite quite hard. So there's sort of been over the last 10 years, many of them been introduced, and looking forward to the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot more introduction of those regulations. So in Australia, you can get fines up to $10 million, which is substantial. In Malaysia, you can get fined up to 500 ringgit, but you can get imprisoned for 3 years. So it's something that you really need to be aware of, something that you really need to take care of. We've done some research lately where we went out and bought a whole bunch of drives off eBay from people who are supposed to be professionals, who are supposed to have been able to, take care of the data properly. I think we've got something like 165 drives, and of those 165 drives, 25 of them we could find personal identifiable information on. So it's something that people are still need to take seriously in some areas, and it's something that we're watching with interest. We're seeing more and more companies, ITADs, enterprises, who are starting to really take this seriously, because it can affect the people at the sort of C-level in organisation. You can start suing them individually, so they're starting to take a bit of notice.
Sorry about the mute button there. John, in your experience with users who say they can do data destruction, what are some, I suppose, use cases, or what defines data destruction, and where are some good examples and some really bad examples that you've come across?
Okay, so there's a number of aspects in terms of what needs to be completed. There is the obvious. There's the removal of data, and again, there are certain standards, global standards, and regional standards in terms of how data is removed. But as Chris also mentioned, the chain of custody is equally important to make sure that you have a full audit trail, so that should at any point in the future you have to prove that you have correctly removed that data, then you can do so, and that needs to be, identified by the asset itself, by a serial number, model number, etc. Also, the type of erasure that was used, and we do hear a lot about 3 passes, single passes, crypto arrays, many different types of erasure. The good thing is, if it's done correctly, erasure's erasure. There's nothing left. So it's important that people understand and have a process that's built into their business operations, that is fully auditable by either the usual QHSE type environments, but also legally. If somebody comes into a business and said, I've found a drive or a phone or whatever the device may be that I believe I've got personal data on, then obviously you need to protect yourself.
No problem. Chris, when you're running a company that might be ITAD, or you might be helping some friends out selling some PCs or servers, or you've got a deal on something, you've got an organisation that claims that they can do data destruction. How do you make sure that there is a process or some examples of where the process has been broken? And you mentioned before about C-level and of course directors that can be liable for any leaking of information due to, I suppose, any complacency or just ignorance. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So you can erase, like John says, at a disk level. And as John said, you really want to have some sort of auditable trail that says, defines what was erased, how it was erased, and when it was erased, depending on how paranoid you are, and by the way, who erased it. And so that you've got that trail that you can go back to, and so that it gives you some sort of idea also, things like, did you go looking for hidden areas? Did you go looking for remapped sectors and things like that on the disk? Were they actually there? And were they actually dealt with? The other thing that we're seeing at the moment with personally identifiable information is actually erasing in the live environment as well. So if I want to comply with PCI, credit card type regulations, I'm allowed to keep those records for 6 months. So how do I make sure that I can prove that I have properly erased those records after the time that I'm allowed to keep them, how can I prove that? Have I got an audit trail in that case as well, where I can show that I have properly taken care of that or personally identifiable data after I finished using it?
The other thing just to bear in mind also, in terms of those audit trails, there are different legislations around the globe in terms of how long that data needs to be retained for. So here in Europe, and I know the European market better than the other parts of the world, but certainly here in the UK, 7 years is the requirement to hold information. I know in Germany it's 10 years, and I'm sure in New Zealand, Australia, there's other legislation. I don't know if it's in line with here. So again, knowing what your local requirements is in terms of data retention, to make sure that you have that audit trail in a form that can be accessed for whatever period of time is needed is critical too.
Yeah, it sounds obvious, but you need to make sure that your back of house systems can actually store it for 7 years. And you're not just, oh, we don't need these anymore, we throw them away, but you need systems in the back end as well to make sure that you are complying. Like John says, 7 years is sort of a fairly standard time frame.
Fantastic. All right. Just a brief question heading on John's way. Sustainability and data erasure. The discussion that goes on, there's one thing to protect a customer's data from leaking. Then there's also the intent to see value and reuse what we have safely and securely. How does sustainability fit within what you do? And Chris, feel free to chime in as well.
Okay, well, there's actually a conflict there in some respects. If you look at it in an absolute way, if you really want to remove data, then shred the device, physically destroy the device. However, that doesn't sit too well with sustainability, and obviously the world we're in now, I would say that sustainability is probably taking a lead now in terms of how we regenerate and reuse product, rather than the erasure. And I think that's because of two things. One is obviously the pressures on us from a global perspective, but also the confidence we have in the ability to erase data in an effective way. So certainly, we would always recommend processing a device, regenerating it. Obviously, if the device is not up to standard, it's failing, or it's beyond recoverable in terms of the amount of defects a device has, then sure, the only resolution that is going to be physical destruction. Our products, we've always been very much focused, and this is where we do differ a little bit from Blanco, but our focus has always been on regenerating the product. So taking bare hard drives, SSDs, working them, testing them, making them fit for reuse. But obviously an important part of that is we have to be 100% confident that we've erased all the data in an appropriate manner. So they do sit, as I said, I've seen over the last few years, certainly a move in terms of the trend of how can we regenerate this product, but also maximize the value in that asset. Can we grade a device? Can we map out errors? Can we create a defect-free drive? Can we increase the performance and the health of a product? So those are all challenges that we try to take on in what we do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. We've got some statistics in a slide that we show at conferences like this. I won't show the slide, but I mean, we've got a record. There's 53.6 million metric tons of electronic waste generated worldwide in 2019. There was a 25% increase in 5 years, 106 times the weight of the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. And we're expected to increase to 74 million metric tons by 2030. And it's something we can't ignore. It's something we've got to say, we've got to do something about this. So Blanco want to be part of that. We want to get others involved in that. We call it the circular economy, where you can start to reuse IT equipment. And I mean, I'll give you a personal example. I've just bought an original iPad for my mother-in-law, and all she's going to use it for is Messenger, and so it's perfect. And so it's an old piece of technology, but actually that's all we need, and so we can reuse that in that type of situation. And there are, I'm sure, other examples where we can take old tech, and even if we just use it for a dedicated purpose, that's great. You know, it's going to work really well, and it's going to work really well for her. So it's been erased by Blanco. I've got the report. I know, you know, what it is. I know how it was erased. I know when it was erased, and so on and so forth. So I'm pretty confident that I can take that, re-put the firmware in, update it, put what I want on it, and we can use that. And that's really all we need, and that's all we need it for.
Yeah. So I suppose then, John, moving forward on that, what makes a storage device fit for reuse or safe to reuse? It's one thing to securely erase the data. It's another thing to ensure that there is a production or a reused device going back out to market that somebody potentially sold. What makes it safe to I suppose broaden the context?
Okay, I mean, as I said, the number one requirement obviously is to remove all user data from the device, and that can be done in a number of ways. It can be done using a traditional overwrite, where you've physically written over any piece of data that sits on the device. People now will hear more about things like cryptographic arrays, which is a method whereby you do not actually remove the data itself, but you remove the encryption keys. So the data is fully encrypted. It's a self-encrypting device, so it's configured that way and can only work in that way. So when you remove those keys, those encryption keys, the data is still there, but it's unretrievable. It's random data. So that's becoming more prevalent, and certainly as the capacities of hard drives increase, the one write overpass becomes rather challenging. If you've got a 20 terabyte drive, to overwrite a drive could be days. It could be 3 days, which is going to be impractical in a lot of settings. So that's where crypto arrays comes in. So that's the primary factor, is to safely remove the data, and as we said earlier, to make sure there's an audit trail for that. Secondary, from our perspective, then, is to test the integrity of the product itself. So is it performing within the specifications? Are the transfer rates what we would expect to be? Are there, we look at a huge number of different factors and sensors. So we would look at the temperature of the drive. Is it working within spec? Are there each of the individual heads working and working again within spec? So at the end of the day, when we give a green light to a drive and say that's fit for reuse, we can safely say that all data has been removed. We can also confidently say that the drive is working within specifications and is fit for reuse. So it's an overall package, and from our perspective, it's a single push of a button to give you an end result. But it's a combination of all. If the drive does not fit, it's not fit for purpose, so therefore you've got 4 heads and one head is not functioning at all, then obviously we would fail that device and say that it's not fit for purpose. The other thing also is to look at the quality of the media. We're looking at the amount of defects. Or is the media becoming more unstable the more that we try to process the drive? So if we try to map out defects and then we find more defects, then we try to do it again and find more again, you can see that media is unstable. So again, in that circumstance, we would say that the drive is not fit for reuse.
So as you mentioned before, a cryptographic erasure, is it secure, or where is cryptographic erasure come into play? Where would it be used rather than a standard wipe? As a layman, I'm trying to understand. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more effective in terms of evolution within the product. As I said earlier, as drive capacities get bigger and bigger and bigger, single overwrites. And I know we did mention right at the beginning of the call, the 3-pass overwrite which was really designed, when I had hair that long ago. So it's really not a practical. It was actually designed where the heads and the tracks had some leniency. There was gaps between the tracks on the drive, so you wanted to do a 3-pass to make sure you kind of covered the edges of the tracks. Modern drives are so densely populated in terms of the tracks, it's really not an issue. Once you've done a single write overrun, you're good to go. It's more of a case of, as time goes on, we're finding ways to process and erase devices in a way that's economically viable. If you were going to go and put a load of 20 terabyte drives on a rig, sat there for 3-4 days, and the asset value is $50 or whatever it might well be, it's just not viable to do so. And then we're going to end up into a scenario where people are saying, if it's not viable, what do I do? Well, I'll just shred it because it's cheaper and it's easier and quicker. And then we've got the challenges of sustainability. So, as I said, I kind of look at it as a 3-way triangle between, the value of the asset, the requirements around sustainability, and the obligation to erase data. And depending on, what the product is, you kind of end up going towards one of those 3 points of the triangle.
So we've mentioned data, whatever my accent is. We've mentioned in many different ways. We all understand it's in just about everything that we own, from our phones to our PCs to anything. What if we talk about data erasure? Can we elaborate on what hardware, and Chris, if you can start, is really relevant to any discussion when we're in an ITAD process? So I know that with Blanco, we look at data erasure, the iOS on Cisco switches. We look at data erasure of iPhones, iPads. A little bit more, if we could elaborate on that a bit more to understand what is a potential missed opportunity, or is a customer not aware that they have assets that have sensitive data that we're not safely or securely cleaning?
Okay, just going back to what, building on what John was saying as well, the cryptographic erasure is a relatively new thing, as we've got new technology with self-encrypting drives and stuff like that. And people sort of say, well, how safe is that? Shouldn't I be overwriting the whole thing? The story that I tell, like especially with erasing phones, which is often done with cryptographic erasure. You remember a little while ago, the FBI shot and killed a whole bunch of terrorists, as they do. And then they went back to Apple and said, can you let us into your phone, please? Because they're 256-bit encrypted. If we erase the cryptographic key, we will never, ever, 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 ever recover that data. And Apple, refused. So they found another way of getting around it, but it is incredibly secure. 256-bit encryption. It's been estimated that if every computer on the planet tried to break that encryption for 20 years, it still wouldn't happen. So it's a very, very safe way of erasing data, is just to get rid of that encryption key. In terms of applying it to other items like phones and things like that, the iOS has encrypted the phone probably for about 5 years now or more. Android have followed suit since I think about version 9. And so once again, if you get a device that's AES 256-bit encrypted, which these devices are, you erase the encryption key, you've effectively stopped any ability or prevent anybody from accessing any data that might have been on that device. In terms of things like network switches and things like that, you got to be a little bit more careful there. So with Apple, you can reflash the firmware, and sometimes we have to do that. So if they go into DFU mode or iTunes mode, some people call it, you can reflash the firmware. You can put new firmware on the device. A little bit more problematic with Android, but possible. With switches, We've only just started to erase switches. So the old way was just going in there and deleting all the config files and stuff like that. We've actually got a product now where we can go in there and overwrite the config files. So we're getting rid of all the any network data that might have been on the device. If you really want to go for it, we can erase the firmware as well as. So you've just got a completely clean device, which then becomes problematic in getting a working switch again. So we give you the option of just erasing the network data that's on there, or you can erase the whole thing. And if you've got a good relationship with Cisco, you can get some more firmware and rebuild that. So, like John says, it's horses for courses and deciding, what's the most appropriate method for erasing different data storage, and how good it needs to be. With the phone, you've got the data storage, but then the cosmetic value comes into it quite a bit as well. Not quite the same as the server. You're not quite so worried about how it looks, but with the phone, you're really worried about how it looks, as well as have we got rid of all the data from this, and we've got the functionality of the phone. So we do the erasure, but we're doing diagnostic tests for functionality, and people are doing cosmetic tests as well, so that they can get a market value of the phone and reuse it. And that market is just going gangbusters with people reusing iPhones and Android phones. It's growing hugely. It's just growing massively, especially with the new iPhone. Sorry, with the 5G phones being released, people are starting to update their phones quite a lot.
Just to quickly continue on what Chris was saying, then I think over the next coming months and certainly years, but coming months, I think the networking equipment piece is going to be really exciting. Blanco working away as we are for various solutions, and there are a whole host of challenges because there's very little standardization across different vendors and even different products within the same vendor. The NIST clear option, which was the historic way of removing data, just removing the config file. Blanco have proved, I'm sure, and we can certainly prove that we can easily find domain names, IP addresses, passwords. Just because they've been formatted does not mean that it's been overwritten. So we're taking the same approach as Blanco. We need to do a full overwrite. There are some other challenges in terms of how do you handle licensing keys to retain the value of product. How do we put OSs back on devices? Do we remove OSs? Where do we keep them? Et cetera, et cetera. So I know Neil Vill was asking me about a new product that we're going to be releasing fairly soon. So I can reach out to Neil and tell him more about that soon. But the networking space is going to be interesting because there's an absolute ton of networking equipment, which at the moment, unfortunately, I think is ending up being destroyed. When I walk around ITADs, I can see piles and piles of switches and routers, which is kind of, we don't know what to do with this. And if they do, it's a really cumbersome manual task. So we're looking at driving some efficiencies and looking how we can automate that process.
Yeah, one thing we're doing at Blanco just to try and deal with that complexity is we're putting the ability to create a workflow in the cloud, if you like. One of the things that it's really hard for an ITAD to deal with is, we talk about having consistency of methodology. So we identify how many disks there are, what sort of disks they are, how we should approach erasing those, and all sorts of things. And it can vary from device to device, from customer to customer. And it's sort of like, okay, so how do we get a consistent process? And with an ITAD, you mightn't have staff that hang around very long or are very qualified to make those sorts of decisions. So can we standardize that so that we can identify what we've got and say, okay, this is such and such a device, whether it be a network device, whether it be laptop, whether it be a phone, whether it be a server, and just say, okay, we recognize what we're dealing with here. And as an organization, these are our standardized procedures for doing that. And we can build those procedures. And so the local application will identify what we've got, and then the cloud, or even in some cases, the local workflows will say, okay, this is a process that we need to do with this. So we're taking that decision-making process away from the operator, and we're just saying, this is an XYZ device. It should be treated with matter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's part of the process. Like John's saying, is that you hit a network switch and you think, oh crumbs, what do I do here? And if you can take that into a workflow which makes that decision for you, it just simplifies everything, makes everything, all the decisions are made a lot quicker and a lot more consistently. And so you've got the product itself, which gives you a consistent process, and then we've got sort of an augmented thing outside that, with workflows, which gives you a consistent way of dealing with different devices. And that's kind of what we're working on hard at the moment, to take that decision making off the floor, if you like, and just make it quicker and faster. It's something we're just introducing at the moment, and like John says, it's things arrive on your bench and you're thinking, what on earth is this and how do I deal with it? Yeah.
I think the thing is also, if you have the ability to automate a process,
Yeah.
you then also can effectively de-skill that from a labor perspective, reduce your operating costs as well. So when we're talking about, realizing the value in an asset, if we can now, streamline that process, reduce the cost, our ROI on the individual product becomes a little easier to handle. So again, you try to remove human elements and mistakes aren't made, drive efficiencies by automating a process, and of course then certifying the correct process and procedure for removing the data safely. You tick all those boxes, then you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly. You've summed it up beautifully.
Fantastic. Look, what I'm going to do is has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask in the comments, or John or Chris, is there anything you'd like to add to the current dialogue? Given we've got a few minutes left till the next presentation.
I think like we've just been discussing recently. I think like we've just been discussing recently, and John summed it up beautifully. Is that the thing that the ITADs are facing? I think is that like 20 years ago when I first started, you got decent margins, and they were you got products from organisations. You did the erasure because you had you could make a margin on the product that you had at the end. It was very easy to do that. And lately it's become less and less easy. With pandemic, all of a sudden it's become more easy again because everyone is desperate for IT. And with the chip shortage and everything else, people are still desperate for IT, so it's great. But you're still looking for ways where you can increase efficiencies, where you can, when you've got issues with shortages of labor and everything else like that, how can I do things faster, more efficiently, more consistently, not rely on, people knowing what to do, but just, and getting all of that stuff done. How can I expand my expertise to beyond a laptop or a server, and I'm looking at like you say, Brett, I'm looking at the infrastructure now. I'm looking at switches and routers. Massive for Blanco, and I'm sure for other people as well, is just the whole mobile market is absolutely exploding. So I think these are the sort of things that ITADs are facing now, as I'm just getting this massive amount of different devices. How do I manage those? How do I interface? Like you say, a question there from Joe, do our products interface with the various ERP systems? And yeah, you have to.
Absolutely.
You absolutely have to. And you're sort of thinking, well, do we do that at the end of the process or during the process? And yeah, there are questions like that we're facing as well. And we're sort of thinking, well, both.
But I think the difference, as you're saying, though, Chris, is that, back in the past, the distant past, either product would be there. It's an erasure product. It's a a process. But now it's all encompassing, and we have to fit within that process, within the customers or the ITAD's process. So we need to make sure that the data that we collect in terms of when we've erased or processed a product, that's pushed into their ERP system. It has to be a streamlined process. It's not where we are a bolt-on product. We're now fully integrated into people's own ERP systems. So it is a change, but one I think that we certainly relish, and it works well for us because we can commit to the customer because we know it's a long-term engagement, knowing that we're not just selling a few licenses and see you later, guys. It's now much more deeper than that, and we're actually integral to somebody's daily operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you say, people are looking let's capture, for instance, a specification of this thing straight away. No errors and keyboarding in and stuff like that. Let's do it as efficiently and as quickly as possible. Let's get it integrated with our ERP system as quickly as possible, so that we can make decisions. Is this of any economic value? How far do we process it? Do we stop right here? And things like that. You're absolutely right, John. Yeah.
So I think the irony behind this conversation is that the presentation back in the US that was held earlier this year was one of my first introductions to Blanco and erasure, and I'd never really looked at the mindset apart from Backyard Joe that would turn up and offer to provide an email that's a certificate that would wipe the hard drive. What I really did not appreciate is how much effort is involved and how it is to do it right. It's not just getting an asset and running a program. It's about having a process from, fundamentally chain of custody is what I see is the single point of accountability. If you can demonstrate that to your customer, it's immediately a differentiator. And in the way that you guys do your service and complement each other is really educating the consumer of your services as to what's really required to get a good outcome. Because if you don't want to have high-paid resources sitting there waiting for a drive to pass or fail. You don't want to have high-paid resources decommissioning data centers, then standing them all up again to destroy it. There's a lot that goes into it that I learned and I'm still learning, and it turns into a really great conversation, because if your customer doesn't understand it, they'll never see the value in it until they have to do it themselves. And I think that's a key point in looking at this as a topic. That there is a lot to it, and I'm just mindful of time. If you've got any words, I saw you put your finger up there. We've got 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I've just got a really good example of that. So one of the things that our customers are looking at, for instance, if I trade in a phone to Telstra or to a carrier or whatever, and that carrier processes it, they're looking at, okay, we've processed it, and we're going to go back to the owner of the phone or the people who owned it, they've traded it in, and say, here's your certificate of erasure. And that's a real value to me as a consumer, because I've traded in my phone, I've got the latest new flash iPhone or whatever, but I've already also got a certificate that says that the thing that I traded in has been cryptographically erased, and none of my data's going to appear on Facebook. Thank you.
I think that's fantastic. Good context. John, is there anything you'd like to say before I close it up?
No, I think it's been an engaging dialogue, good as always. And I think, certainly from both organizations, there's things in the pipeline that you're going to see coming out very soon. So we're not standing still. The market's changing. We're evolving with the market as well in terms of products. Fun times ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. And personally, it's been really great to work with you guys over the last month or so, and share our knowledge and have a bit of banter. And I look forward to maintaining that relationship in the future. To all those that are in this presentation, please reach out and speak to John or Chris and their team. They're what makes this organisation valuable, is their knowledge, relationships, and any questions. Just please either forward them through me, Joe, or contact them directly. So thanks once again, guys, for your bit of banter. And John, I don't know if you're going down the pub now. It's, what is it, 5?
It's 10 past 5 in the morning, so I might grab a coffee.
And thank you so much for getting up early. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem.
All right. I'll see everybody on the next chat, which is around third-party maintenance, in 5 minutes' time. Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.